Hey, Bill Tingle here from STRUMS. I was talking to somebody yesterday about learning guitar, and this person gave me an idea. He said, you know what I'd like? I used to play a long time ago, and I quit, and I need to really start over from scratch. I'd like a brief crash lesson on the guitar, something less than 30 minutes. So after talking about what he'd like to see, I came up with this video. If I was to only give one lesson to this person, this would be it. This is a crash lesson on the guitar. Our context is a 6-string acoustic guitar, but it applies to electric as well. By the end of this crash lesson, you should be able to name the various parts of the guitar, have a couple of references on how to tune the guitar, how to change strings, understand how to come up with the major chords in a key, and then how to come up with the notes in specific chords in that key, and then how to hold a pick, how to strum a chord, and then finally how to play 4 super easy chords to a popular 70s tune. So you want to stick around for that. So let's get started. All right, if you're going to play guitar, it'd be good to know the parts of a guitar. So from top to bottom, this is the headstock, and attached to the headstock are tuning pegs. You turn these clockwise or counterclockwise to tune a string. You've got the nut. It's made of plastic, nylon, bone. There's different materials, and that terminates the strings to set the length for the pitch. You've got frets on the fretboard. These frets are metal bars of sorts that when you press your finger behind the fret, it creates a pitch. You've got the fretboard, and then fretboard markers, which are super important for not just knowing where to put your fingers on the guitar, but also to help memorize the fretboard. We'll talk more about that later. Then there's the soundboard, or the top of the guitar. There's the sound hole, which is the place where sound emanates from the guitar. There's this little, often wood piece down here. It's called the saddle, which holds the bridge, which again is often plastic, nylon, or bone, and it terminates the strings at the end of the guitar. Then there are the bridge pins, which these little pins come in and out, and they hold down the strings. And when we change strings in the video on changing your guitar strings, we'll talk about those. And then there's strap buttons oftentimes down at the bottom and the top, so that you can put a strap on and hold the guitar in place. So that's all I'm going to talk about for this. Hopefully that's helpful, and let's move on to the next part. In the next part, I'm just going to refer you to another video. It is on tuning your guitar. There are lots of good videos out there on tuning your guitar. I've also created one. Just look below to get the reference to that, and make sure you know how to tune your guitar. Next part is how to change guitar strings. Again, I'm not going to do it in this video, but I will provide you a reference to a video where I show you how to change your strings. Again, there are other videos on YouTube on how to do that, but there are some ways that are better than others, and so I encourage you to check out my video on changing guitar strings. All right, in this part, I'd like to talk a little bit about how you can derive the specific notes in a key signature. You probably know the notes in music are A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and through those intervals there are something called half steps and whole steps. A half step is the shortest interval between two notes in music, and in the case of guitar, a half step is the interval distance between one fret and another. So starting with the key of C and using sharps, you can see here that you've got C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, and then importantly, going from E to F is a half step. There's no E sharp per se. If there would be, E sharp would be F. And so it's important. And likewise, from B to C is a half step. And so in concept, you don't have a B sharp or a C flat. You just have B to C. So again, it goes C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F. Half step to F sharp, half step to G sharp, to A sharp, to B, to C. So it's important to know the half steps, and it's super important to know that E to F is a half step and B to C is a half step. That'll be super helpful going forward. Now, we just kind of showed what a chromatic scale is. A chromatic scale is a scale with all half steps. And so if I was to play a C chromatic scale, it would be C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, C. Now, rarely would we play a chromatic scale, but there are a lot of places where you'll play half-step runs between chords and in solos. All right, let's talk about whole steps. There are half steps and whole steps. A whole step is basically two half steps. And so we just talked about a half step being one fret to another. So F to the next fret, F sharp is a half step. If I want to go a whole step, I'd go 2 frets. So if I'm on F here, go 2 frets, that's to G. So a whole step is F to G. Now let's talk about a major scale. It's super important to remember the C major scale. That's basically the white notes on a piano. And also know how it's constructed. It's super helpful if you memorize this. If I'm going to play a C scale, I'm going to play from C 2 whole steps, a half step, 3 whole steps, and a half step. So 2, 1, 3, 1. And so you'll notice if I start on C, play 2 whole steps, this is going to be like playing the white notes on a piano. It's going to be C, whole step, D, whole step, E, half step from E to F, and we just talked about between E and F is a half step. E, F. From F, 3 whole steps, F, G, whole step, A, whole step, B, half step, B to C. And again, that's the white notes on the piano. And so knowing the chromatic scale C, C sharp, and so on to C, and knowing that there's half steps between E and F, B, and C, and then finally knowing that the formula for a major scale is 2 whole steps, 1 half step, 3 whole steps, 1 half step, you can pick any note and play the notes in that key and figure out where the sharps and flats are. We'll talk more later about it. There's certain key signatures where you talk about it in terms of flats, which is a half step down from a note. And there's certain keys that are sharps, and we don't want to make it too complicated. So try to make it real simple now and just talk about sharps. All right, now we're going to look at how the primary chords of a key are determined, as well as the notes that make up a basic chord. A triad is a chord that's made up of 3 notes. The primary triads in any key are based upon the 1st, 4th, and 5th notes of the scale. And oftentimes people talk about the 1, 4, 5 chord. We're going to get into other chords like 2 and 6 and minor chords, but for now we're just going to talk about the major ones. So in the key of C, the primary chords based upon the 1st, 4th, and 5th note of the scale are C, F, and G. You can see in the diagram that C is the 1st note or the root, F is the 4th note, and G is the 5th note. And so in a lot of popular songs in the key of C, where there's only 3 chords, a lot of times you'll see that the chords are C, F, and G. And we can apply the same concept to other keys as well. Now, the formula for constructing the primary chords is to include in each chord or triad the 1st note, 3rd note, and 5th note of the scale, beginning with each bass note. So, if we look at the 3 primary chords in the key of C, they are C, F, and G chords. Starting with the C chord, we're going to play the 1st, 3rd, and 5th notes in the key of C, and that would be C, E, G. So if I was to play a C chord, there's 6 notes being played there, and the only notes being played are C, E, G, so some are played more than once. Moving on to the 4th chord in the key of C, that's the F chord, C, D, E, F. And so to play an F chord, you'd play the 1st note, which is F, and then go up to the 3rd of that and the 5th of that, which would be F, A, C. And so if I played an F chord, each note in there is going to be either F, A, or C. Now, if I move to the 5th note of the C scale and build the G chord, it's going to be starting with G, the 3rd note B, and the 5th note D. I would play a G chord. And again, within that chord are only either a G, B, or D note. So that is how we derive the 3 primary chords in a key, as well as the 3 notes in a triad or a chord. All right, let's look at how to read a chord chart. Shown here, you can see a grid that looks a lot like the neck of a guitar, which it is. Sometimes the chord charts are shown horizontally, sometimes they're shown vertically. You can always tell how the orientation is by usually a thick line, and you'll see 6 lines representing 6 strings. So in this case, the chord chart in this diagram is horizontal. And you can see that the wide bar, the wide line on the left is the nut, and we talked about that when we talked about the parts of the guitar. And then you can see the 1st fret, the 2nd fret, and the 3rd fret. And so if you look to the left, there are symbols that show basically how you're going to press your fingers down. And so if there's a O or a 0, that means the string is going to ring and you're not going to touch that string, but you are going to play it, either pick it or strum on that. And then you can see if there's a number 1, that means to press your 1st finger, your index finger, down at that fret location where there's the dot. You could see the number 2, which is where you press your middle finger, and 3 where you press your ring finger. 4 would be pinky. In this initial course, we're not going to be using the pinky much. And then you can see an X, which means don't play that. You can either just don't pick it, or depending on the chord, sometimes you barely touch it with your finger to mute it. You don't press down all the way, but you touch it to mute it so it doesn't ring. And so here you can see that it's the chord chart for a C chord. We just talked about how to build a C major triad by looking at the 1st, 3rd, and 5th notes of a C scale. So you can see here, this chord is a C chord because the notes are C, E, and G. To the right, you can see which note is going to be played. On the bottom string of the 6th string, it's muted, so it's not played. The 3rd finger is on the 3rd fret and the 5th string to play a C. The 2nd finger is on the 4th string and the 2nd fret to play an E. The 3rd string is open and ringing, that's a G. The 2nd string, you're going to press your 1st finger down on the 1st fret, which makes it a C. And then you're going to leave the 1st string open and let it ring, and that's an E. So you can see here that you're playing C, E, G, C, E, and that makes up the C triad chord. All right, in this next section, we're going to look at how to hold a pick. If you use a pick, which a lot of people play with just their fingers, which is fine as well, but if you play with a pick, it's helpful, especially when strumming, to get a nice crisp sound. You hold the pick just firm enough to not drop it, but you also want to keep it relaxed. And so you don't want to grip it tight, because when you're picking and strumming, your body needs to be relaxed. Your hand and your arm needs to be relaxed. So you'll get a feel for just how firm to hold it so you don't drop it, but you do want to keep it as relaxed as possible without dropping it. And so I like to think in terms of holding the pick so that it is perpendicular to my thumb and as shown in the drawing. And you want to make sure there's plenty of nylon, plastic, whatever your pick is, showing so that you can pick the string and so you can strum. And that's basically how I think of holding a pick. All right, next we're going to talk about how to strum a guitar. Before we get into actual strumming, there's a few things it's important to know. First of all, in music, there's a notion of a measure or a bar. And a measure or a bar in music, it refers to a single unit of time featuring a specific number of beats played at a particular tempo. And so you often hear 4/4 time, 3/4 time, 6/8 time. I would argue most songs are in 4/4 time, although there are many, many songs in 3/4 time, and then other songs can be more complex. And then there's tempo. Tempo is the number of beats played in a minute. So for example, if you looked at a chord chart for Peaceful Easy Feeling by the Eagles, you'd probably see it was about 70, 72 beats per minute. And as I mentioned, time signature, which is either something like 4/4 time or 3/4 time, time signature refers to how many beats are in a measure And so you could have 4 beats per measure is designated by 4/4 time. 3 beats per measure is 3/4. 6 beats would be 6/8. And so that would be time signature. And so the most important part here is really when we talk about a measure or a bar, and also tempo, because you're always going to want to have a sense of what the tempo of a song is when you're practicing. Now let's move on to strumming. And so strumming, a lot of people believe strumming is hard or complicated, when in reality a lot of times we've already applied the movement of strumming. If you think about when you fan your face or you shake a thermometer, it's a very fluid motion. You know, your whole arm is kind of working together between your fingers, hand, and wrist and arm. And so we've already talked about how to hold a pick. If you think about strumming, you just want to get a fluid motion. And a couple things. You don't want to keep your hand far from the top of the guitar. You want to keep your hand as close to the strings as possible without hitting them unintentionally. And then you also don't want to bring your arm too high and too low until you've mastered strumming and you want to demonstrate good stage presence or whatever. But in general, you want to minimize your energy. So if I'm strumming a G chord, I want to keep my hand as close to the strings as possible that's comfortable without hitting them when I'm not intending to hit the string. And then also I don't want to be swinging my arm way up and down. So, one way might be, if I'm going to strum a G chord, is so you can see I'm not moving way up and I'm not moving way down. You can do that when you get better, but that's probably the main point that I would share there. And so we talked about strumming and hitting the strings, and sometimes you won't want to hit all the strings, so you'll practice only hitting maybe the top strings or maybe the bottom strings. But in general, it's good this is what strumming's about. And then the other part of strumming, besides swinging your hand in a rocking motion to hit the strings, is the timing that we just talked about. So if we're playing 4/4 time, and we only want to play the first note of a measure, you would think of it like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm playing a whole note because it's ringing for all 4 beats of a measure that's in 4/4 time. Now, if I wanted to hit the first and third notes in a measure, I would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. If I wanted to practice strumming on every beat, I would go ahead and strum down on each beat of a measure in 4/4 time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. If I wanted to strum down, up, which it would be eighth notes in 4/4 time, the way to think of it is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. It's helpful to fill in the up part of the strum with an and. And if you get into 16th notes, a lot of people will do 1E and a, 2E and a, 3E and a. But to keep it simple for now, we're just going to go 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1. And then as we progress, you can get into picking a note and strumming a note alternately. Like if I went, and in that case, I'm picking on the first and third notes of a measure, and I'm strumming on the second and fourth notes of a measure. So hopefully that's helpful at just a real basic introduction to strumming, measures, and time signatures, and tempo. We'll see you in the next part of this lesson. Okay, this is going to be a fun part. I'm going to show you how to play 4 relatively easy chords to a popular 70s tune, Horse with No Name. It's one of the first songs I learned as a child. And so these 4 chords are easy in terms of you only use 2 fingers at the same fret. And so the chords may sound complex, but they are relatively easy as you get started. And they give you an opportunity to play along with a song early in the learning process. And before we jump into the first chord, I want to talk a little bit about how to press your fingers and play a chord. First, it's important on your your finger hand, and I'm right-handed guitar player, so on my left hand, which is I call my fingering hand, number one, I want to trim my nails. And so for those of you that want long nails, it's going to be more difficult, and you're going to have to figure out how to place your fingers in a way that you can press down and be effective with your playing. But it's best to trim them down, because you want to press down on the tips or the balls of the finger. You want your hand to be kind of in a C-clamp fashion. And so when you're pressing down, you want your thumb to be behind the neck, pressing against it. You see some players with their thumb wrapped over the top, and that's not wrong. It's just as a beginner, it's good to practice keeping that thumb back, and it gives you leverage and building strength with your playing chords. And so you want to have your hands sort of in a C-clamp, tips of the fingers perpendicular to the fretboard, thumb behind, pressing down, and you want to press down right behind the fret. And you only want to touch the string, because if you touch an adjacent string, you're likely to mute it unintentionally. And so you put your finger on the tip, thumb pressed behind, right behind the fret, and then you'll be able to play clearly in this case. So you can hear that's nice and clear. I don't want my finger way to the left of the fret in this case. I want it right behind it, so I get the most leverage and pressure and a clear note. So now let's look at the verse chords in Horse with No Name, and we'll apply what we just talked about with fingering the fretboard. So the first chord we're going to play, there's two chords in the verse, and the first chord is going to be an E minor. And so if you take your first finger and put it on the 5th string right behind the 2nd fret and press down, like I said, on the tip, thumb behind, like a C-clamp. And then take your second finger, your middle finger, and press it on the 4th string 2nd fret right behind the fret. Now, the other thing, a lot of people complain about getting sore fingers. It's probably one of the most uncomfortable parts of playing the guitar. And so you only want to press down on strings when you want to play the chord. Don't be pressing down and way in advance. Keep it down only when you're strumming, and you'll have less likely to get sore fingers. So if we play the E minor chord, again, 6 strings open, first finger on the 5th string 2nd fret, second finger on the 2nd fret 4th string, and I'm going to play on the tips like a C-clamp and let it ring. Now you can tell if I was doing it improperly, and let's say my second finger wasn't on the tip, it was kind of hanging down, it would mute the 3rd string and it would sound like this. They're not all ringing. So it's got to be up on the tip like a C-clamp, right behind that fret. And so that's the E minor chord. Now the second chord in the verse is just as easy, and it's kind of fun because you're going to split the 2 strings you're touching. So what you're going to do is you're going to drop your first finger to the lower note on the 6th string, and you're going to take your second finger and bring it up to the 3rd string on the same fret. So you see kind of like it's like a splitting. And so again, pressing first finger down, index finger down right behind the 2nd fret on the 6th string, second finger right behind the 2nd fret on the 3rd string, C-clamp, tips of the fingers, and you can hear that ringing out. And that's a D6 9 chord. Again, that sounds complex. Don't worry about the names at this point. So if I was to play those two together, I would be... And over time, you can apply different fingerings to different chords as you progress. So for example, if I was playing this for where I'm at in my journey, I would play it with my 2nd and 3rd fingers. But I'm having you play it with just your first 2, so you're only using 2 fingers initially. And you can work on creating clear chords, you can work on your dexterity, you can work on your rhythm, you can work on so many aspects of beginner guitar. And so that's the verse. Okay? Now we're going to go to the chorus. It's just as simple. And so the first chord in the chorus is an E minor chord, and you put as with the first chord in the verse with the E minor, your first finger is right back down on that 5th string 2nd fret on the tip, thumb behind, and pressing like a C-clamp, and then your second finger is on the 1st string 2nd fret. And so that sounds like Now, oftentimes you don't strum every string in a chord. As a beginner, I'm saying don't worry about it right now. Just strum them all. And the reason you can strum them all in all these chords is because as long as you play it as shown, every note, every string, every note is in the chord that you're strumming. And so you can strum all of E minor. And then the last chord, the second chord in the chorus, is a D major 9. Again, sounds complex, don't worry about the name, but it's equally as easy as the first chord. It looks a lot like that E minor chord. You take your first finger on the second fret, third string, second finger on the second string, second fret, and you can strum. And so if I was to strum those two, and so if I was to play it, it would sound like this. For me, is how I would play it. It's the verse. Now I'm going to go to the chorus. So again, you saw me play it with different fingerings. You can play with those if you like. Just noodle around with it. And then you also notice when I was playing, I would sometimes play a low string and I would mute with my palm. That's more of an advanced technique, but you can by all means play around with it rather than just playing straight. You can actually put your palm down. So you might play around with strumming those chords with your palm just barely touching, and you can move it back and move it forward. So there you go. You've got 4 chords that you can play along with the song Horse with No Name, and it's a lot of fun just to play along and work on so many parts of the guitar all at once with just 4 simple chords. See you in the next part. Okay, in this last part, I want to talk about mindset and practice. First, let's talk about mindset. It's super important to take a pen and a paper, maybe a journal, and write down, why do I want to play guitar? So many people are not motivated, they don't practice as much as they want, or they quit because they don't know why they want to play in the first place. And so take a moment, write down, why do I want to play the guitar? And also write down, what will the future look like when I'm playing well? And so you might sit down, get a cup of coffee, a favorite beverage, get a pen and paper, and close your eyes a moment and visualize the future. What will it look like when you're playing? Will you be on a beach? Will you be at a campfire? Will you be at a winery playing with another person professionally? Will you be at a coffee shop? Will you be playing along with your own singing in a club? There could be all kinds of different situations, but it's so important to visualize the future. What will it look like when you're playing and what you want? And always keep that vision in mind as you're practicing and playing and work towards it. And from there, then, create goals for yourself. Create yearly goal, monthly goal, weekly goal, and track against your goals and keep that vision in mind of what you want. I've done this for myself over the years. It's also helpful to set a date where you're actually committed to play. You know, one time I committed to join a band and play live concert venues, and I had to learn 40 songs by a certain day and play live. And that goal was great for me in that I just locked myself up, worked on the tunes, and I was ready to go by the first rehearsal. And so those are some ideas around mindset. Next is practice. You know, a lot of people struggle with the discipline, structure, and approach to practice. I think the first thing is create a space and environment where you will practice. Find a space where everything's left out. Your guitar is sitting out, your computer's out, your notes are out, your capo, your picks. You know, make sure you've got everything right there and have it in a place where it's inviting to go to. If you don't have that, if there's any work to do to enter into practice, that's friction, and friction will keep you from practicing. So have everything in reach, have everything ready to go, have a plan. And so 1 week in advance, what you might do is get your journal out and say, okay, this week on these days during these times, I'm going to practice. And if you commit to a time, make it sacred. If it's every morning, if it's every other morning at 7 a.m., that's your sacred time, and guard it with your life. If you had to go to the doctor and you had an appointment, you would guard that with your life to go to the doctor. So be committed, stick to your visions, stick to your goals. And when you're practicing, a lot of people don't subscribe to this, but I subscribe to only play as fast at the tempo you can play it well. There's a stretch tempo where you're going to make a few mistakes, but always slow down what you're practicing to the point where you can play it to what you think is perfect, and then you can slowly speed it up. The next thing, I learned this from the great Stanley Jordan. I was able to take a few lessons with him, and one of the things that stuck with me is when you're practicing a piece, a tune, don't end on a mistake. And so if you're working on a solo, or if you're working on strumming some chords and changing chords, if you make a mistake, don't stop your practice and go off to dinner or to a meeting. You want to make sure that if you make a mistake, you loop back around, you keep playing, looping, playing until you don't make the mistake. You don't want that last mistake to be in your memory, either muscle memory or your mind memory. And so if you're learning a song, practice the portions where you're making mistakes. And so if you want to be efficient with your time, let's say that you're learning Stairway to Heaven or One of These Nights by the Eagles. Pick whatever song you're trying to learn, and there's a solo or there's part of a bridge that you're making mistakes. Just practice those parts. Loop through those parts and practice those parts. If you're playing everything else easily, you don't need to practice that all the time. Maybe when you start, play all the way through, and at the end of a practice, play all the way through. But to make your practice time efficient, only practice where you're making mistakes. Also, something else I do is I use a tool that allows me to select parts of a song and loop through select parts of a song, as well as change the pitch. There are some artists that play in different key signatures or slightly off of a major E tuning. And so I like to get a tool to practice with, and I use Amazing Slowdowner. I don't subscribe to it or endorse it, but I like it, I use it, and it allows me to set up loops and practice parts of songs, and I can loop through until and one of the things I do is when I'm learning an entire song, I'll start at the beginning, and I'll just loop through and move my loop through the whole song. I might chart out some notes, and then I can also slow it down without changing the pitch, and then speed it up to work on certain parts. But a tool like that, Amazing Slowdowner, is great for practice. With that, that's really it. And so I hope you've enjoyed this crash lesson in playing guitar, and I look forward to hearing about your progress if you respond to me and reach out and let me know what you think.